So continuing with Nixon, we talked about the Paris Peace Accords, which ended our direct involvement in Vietnam early in '73, but this was after a long period of talk. So we're actually going to have to step back now to '72. So let's get to the next here. All right. Some pictures we've already looked at, but we have to fast forward through those. Kent State, Jackson State. All right. Nixon going on the TV basically and telling the American people what he was doing about stepping up the bombing of North Vietnam and ordering the mining of like Hai Phong Harbor in order to get he would say, the communists to negotiate in good faith. All right, which eventually led to the Paris Peace Accords. Let's see what we have here. All right, the '72 is also an election year. Okay, so we're several things happening at once. Okay, so there's Nixon and Kissinger there on the right. So one of the things Nixon is remembered for, okay, he's remembered for several things, but one of the things he's remembered for is normalizing relations with China. So remember, China had gone communist right after World War II, okay, but we never really accepted that. We kept up our relations with the Taiwanese government, Chiang Kai-shek's version of China, okay, the more republic type, more democratic China on the island formerly known as Formosa. Okay, we talked about that, or I talked about it, if you were paying attention. We've never really opened up and exchanged like ambassadors and stuff with communist China, okay, which is a big place. There's a lot of people live there. So Nixon at some point decides, you know what, we need to go ahead and we don't have to like the communist Chinese, okay, but you know, they're a fact. They're there. They've been there for 25 years, I guess, at this point. They're not going anywhere. So let's open up for some kind of formal relationship with them. Okay. And as part of this, Nixon will actually travel to China, which I think is the next slide, if I recall. Yeah. Okay. So there on the left, you see a picture of the United States flag and the Communist Chinese flag. There's some kind of event. One of those guys standing at the front might be Nixon. Okay. Here he is with his wife, Pat Nixon. Okay. Touring the Great Wall of China. Well, who wouldn't want to see the Great Wall of China? Heck, I'd like to see the Great Wall of China, but I'm not willing to travel all the way to China to see it. Okay. Just too expensive. But so Nixon goes. All right. There's another picture here of him. Let's see here. Here he is. Okay, President Nixon meets with Chinese Communist Party leader Mao Zedong on February 29, '72. Okay, '72 is an election year. Okay. And I told you about this back when we had the picture of Mao Zedong earlier, that there's been a change in the translation protocols. Okay, and so this is Chairman Mao. Okay, he may appear in the book. Spelled like, I think it's Z-E, and then a dash, and then D-U-N-G maybe, Mao Zedong. It's the same guy. Okay, it's just the name's translation has changed. Right? So he's been the head of China more or less for about 25 years. Okay, and has overseen programs which have done in all kinds of civil liberties that the Chinese had. If they had them even before, I guess. Blood purges, re-education, etc. But anyway, here's Nixon shaking hands with him, putting on a smile, trying to make good. Okay, you can shake his hand and say, "Well, I hate your system of government, but doggone, I love your food." Okay, you can find something common to talk about. All right. And what's one thing it turns out we have in common? Guess what the Chinese like to do? Play ping pong. Alright, so this is in the movie Forrest Gump, if you've seen Forrest Gump. Okay, Forrest Gump is this character who keeps wandering all through history. He's really an idiot, basically, or a high-functioning idiot, but he wanders all through this historical narrative in the movie, and he's one of the people in the movie playing ping pong with the Chinese. Turns out the Chinese like ping pong, and so we actually, and it's a sport you can do with a minimum of expensive equipment, right? Paddles and the ping pong balls and the table. We actually sent a team to play them. I remember this. I mean, you could like tune on your TV and actually see, ping pong, matches between American and Chinese. Okay. All right. So they have this big meeting. They visit. They talk. They try to come up with some things they can agree on. This is before the Paris Peace Accord, so they probably talked a little bit about what's going on in Vietnam. I'm guessing because it's right off. It's China and then Vietnam's attached to it. So I'm sure they talked about all kinds of things. Can we save some wheat or what can we do? So he does this. The Chinese gave us some pandas. Okay. There were no pandas in the United States because they only live in China, and China had been under communist control for a quarter of a century. And so the Chinese sent a couple of pandas our way. They went to live at the National Zoo in Washington, D.C. It's one of the things you did if you were in Washington. You had to go to the National Zoo and see the pandas because there were only 2 pandas in the country. Unfortunately, they never could get them to reproduce. Apparently, pandas don't do well outside of their native environment, or maybe we just had pandas that just couldn't figure it out. But we never did get any baby pandas, and eventually they passed away from old age. And I think the Chinese went ahead and sent us some more pandas. Okay. But this is Nixon going to China. Now, there's a joke about this. I remember there's a joke. How can you get away with this? Okay. Well, there's a Star Trek movie. Yeah, there's a Star Trek movie where they want to send Captain Kirk. And if you don't know anything about Star Trek, this may not make sense, but they want to send Captain Kirk to talk to the Klingons. And Kirk goes, "Well, why send me? I hate the Klingons." And Spock says, "Well, it takes Nixon to go to China." Well, what does that mean? Well, think about it. Nixon has made his political career on being a strong anti-communist. Okay, he'd gone after Alger Hiss. Okay, remember, and he argued with Khrushchev at the kitchen debate. So Nixon is firmly established in the minds of everybody as not, liking communists, which means he can go to China because it won't look like he's kissing up to him or smooching up to him. If some liberal Democrat had gone to China, to visit, people would be like, "Oh yeah, he's in sympathy with those things." Okay, all right. But Nixon can pull it off because everybody knows he's not going to go over there and just give away the world to China. Okay? He just wants to get relationships going with them, and he does. All right, so this is one of the things he's noted for. Okay? Everything Nixon's noted for is trying to improve relations with the Soviet Union, which have been kind of up and down and rocky over time. Okay. Now remember, Eisenhower had met with the Soviet leaders at Geneva back in the 50s, but then and then the Khrushchev had come over and toured the United States. But then we'd had the U-2 incident, and then we'd had the Cuban Missile Crisis, and then things are kind of on the downturn again. And I don't think that I don't recall that Johnson ever met with the Soviets. Johnson was busy dealing with the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights Movement and stuff. And to the best of my recollection, he never actually met with his Soviet counterpart. There would have been meetings, of course, at a lower level. But Nixon will reach out to the Soviets. Okay, hang on here. All right, so the Soviet Union. We need a new slide here. Okay, this is Leonid Brezhnev. He's the head of the Soviet Union at the time. I don't remember if it was anybody between Khrushchev or Brezhnev or not. It's like there's all these old guys at the Soviet Union. Once Stalin dies, they start going through people rather quickly. Okay, for a little while. They're like one of those little Russian nesting dolls. You open one up, and there's another one inside. You open it up, there's another one inside. It's hard to keep track of them all. Okay, but here's Leonid Brezhnev. Okay. Notice it says in a visit to the United States in 1973. Okay, but we're going to go back. We're still in 72. The Nixon administration will negotiate the SALT I agreement with the Soviet Union. At the time, I think it was just called SALT. which I think stood for Strategic Arms Limitation Talks. And then when the talks result in a treaty, it becomes like Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty. Okay? Think back to the Washington Naval Conference back in the 1920s when we signed an agreement to limit the number of battleships and the sizes of battleships. Okay, SALT is this kind of thing to try to defuse some of the tension between the two superpowers. Okay, so they'll do things like limit how many nuclear warheads each side can have. Okay, instead of having enough nuclear warheads to destroy the planet 5 times over, maybe we'll just settle for 2.5 times over. Still more than adequate. This, of course, saves money. You don't have to build as many warheads. Limitations on the number of missiles, number of bombers. Okay. So, for instance, under SALT, just to use an example, okay, but I just happen to know because I saw this picture once. We took some of our older B-52 bombers were in storage out in the desert, what they call Davis Monthan Air Force Base, which is where we store airplanes because it's a dry climate. Okay, in case we had to maybe pull some of them back into use. Okay? And we literally destroyed them in place by cutting the wings off. And then they would leave them there for a while to where when the Soviet spy satellite goes overhead, they can see that the planes have been destroyed. So these are the kind of things you do under SALT. Disable some airplanes or destroy some. Stop building as many missiles. Okay? It doesn't end the Cold War, but it shows maybe we're trying to maybe lessen the tensions a little bit. So this is one of the things Nixon's noted for, is trying to, they called it détente, which is a French word, I think, for talking to people. Okay, so we're trying to back off from the tensions of the Cold War, the Cuban Missile Crisis. Okay, things like that. And of course, the Soviets have been backing the North Vietnamese, so maybe as we're winding up war, it makes it a little easier to talk with them. So anyway, this is one of the things, like I said, Nixon's famous for is foreign affairs success. Okay, even people who are critical of Richard Nixon, which is a pretty long list. Okay, except for to say, he seemed to do pretty good at foreign policy. He's gotten open relations with China. He's helped wrap up the Vietnam War. He's getting us on a little more civil footing with the Soviet Union. Okay. All right. So later in life, when Nixon will come to kind of an end, as we'll get to here in a few slides, and end up have a very tarnished public image. But in later years, people look at him and go, what would President Nixon have to say about this foreign affairs thing? He seemed to have a bit of a skill for it. Okay, and so he's later in life, like I said, people sometimes will go, well, gosh, he was flawed and imperfect, but maybe he had some decent attributes, perhaps. And then some people still hate him, of course. All right, but that's the Soviet Union. What we're leading into next is the election of '72. But that's going to be a new slide. We're running up on the timeline here, so we'll stop with the foreign policy thing, and we'll start up another video to cover the domestic problems.